This episode of Smart Poker Study is brought to you by my upcoming Opponent Destruction webinar. It'll be held on Tuesday, November 29th at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. In this webinar, I'll show you how I work off the tables to analyze my most common opponents' games so that I can exploit them on the tables. I'll show you how to search for your opponent's pre- and post-flop tendencies, their range selections, how they approach different hand strengths by street, and many other things. I'll then show you how you can plan to use their tendencies against them in every session you play. Visit www.smartpokerstudy.com/opponent destruction webinar for more info and to purchase now. Hello, I'm Sky Matsuhashi, founder of SmartPokerStudy.com, the place for poker players who are always striving to be better today than they were yesterday. Poker people, I hope you caught episode 107, where I discussed the Bluff 3-bet, and I dove into everyone's favorite play, the Bluff 3-bet squeeze. Hey, poker people, I hope you had a wonderful Thanksgiving for those who celebrated it. You know, when I was growing up, me and the cousins, we would always hit a movie while the rest of the family, the adults, were cooking dinner. And it was normally some crappy movie, though. Like one year we saw Alien Resurrection, and boy, was that a letdown. But this year, oh man, we saw Doctor Strange, and it was incredible. I highly recommend it to everybody. The lead up to him getting his powers, it was a little long, but hey, he is the Sorcerer Supreme, and you've got to explain how he got his mystical powers. You can't just jump to him having powers for no reason. But the action was great, and the special effects, they rocked super hard. It was incredible. Kind of like on the scale of that Leonardo DiCaprio movie, Inception. Some cool stuff like that in there, but it was great. And this movie was an incredible addition to the Marvel lineup of movies, so check it out if you haven't already. Alrighty, let's talk some 3-bet defense, baby. So for an overview of this episode, classes 2 and 3 of this 3-bet MED, they were about the yin of making 3-bets. But today, it's time to get to the yang of defending against 3-bets. First up, I'll discuss making a pre-flop plan for 3-bet defense. You'll learn to take your opening range, decide how frequently you'll defend, and choose the hands that you will be doing the defense with. And we'll separate your defending range into 3-bet calling hands and 4-betting hands. And after that, I'll get into the adjustments that you'll make when you're at the tables and you're actually employing your 3-bet defense ranges. You'll learn what to look for before you call in position, or out of position, of course, and what to consider before you get aggressive with a bluff 4-bet or a value 4-bet. And lastly, I'll give you a solid plan for practicing and studying your 3-bet defense skills. Wow, saying that just now, it sounds like a heck of a lot, so we'll get to it. Just make sure you visit the show notes page for everything I discussed today. And there's definitely some screenshots there of different ranges and some Flopzilla stuff. But the show notes page is www.smartpokerstudy.com/pod108. And while you're there, you can sign up for the weekly boost for exclusive poker strategy directly to your inbox. Alrighty, let's do this. Gambate.
And now for our feature presentation.
Okay, so how do you deal with 3-bets? When playing poker, we know we're going to get 3-bet, right? Just like we know we're going to open pots, we're going to face C-bets, we're going to face raises and check raises and donk bets and donk leads and all that kind of stuff. When you know something is going to happen, you'd be foolish to not have a plan in place. Novice players don't think this way, They take it one hand at a time. They don't develop rules or procedures or plans to deal with the common occurrences that happen in every session and oftentimes in every single hand you play. And, of course, making a plan is something you do away from the tables during your study sessions. So this next part is all about the off-table work that you're going to do. And we shouldn't try to plan for every single occurrence. We could be 3-bet by a lag, a loose aggressive player, a donk, a nit, or a fish, or a tight aggressive player. Maybe it's a min 3-bet, maybe it's a 3x 3-bet, or even a 10x 3-bet, or an overshove, Let's keep it simple today and plan for the most common situation. We're facing a 3-bet from a tag or a lag player, and they have some value and some bluffs in their 3-betting range. Of course, if it's a nit 3-betting you, then you'll tighten up your defense, and if it's a mega donk 3-betting you, you might defend much wider and 4-bet much wider. But we've got to come up with a standard plan that we can adjust on the fly. So let's dive into my 4-step plan for 3-bet defense. So step number 1 is know your opening range. And I discussed opening ranges by position back in episode 90, not too long ago. If you haven't listened to that episode yet, and if you haven't developed your own opening ranges, please pause the pod right now, listen to that episode number 90, and create your opening ranges. Take a full week if you have to, then come back here to me. I don't mind waiting. So, since you're still listening, I'm going to assume that you know your ranges. For today, I'm going to go through these 4 steps with my suggested cutoff open raising range, and that is 23.7%. And this consists of 314 combos of hands. And I'll break it down into categories now, but you can see a screenshot of this in the show notes. So, the pocket pairs are all pocket pairs, deuces or better. The suited hands, ace deuce suited or better. King 7 suited or better, Queen 9 suited or better, 7-5 suited or better for the suited gappers, and 6-5 suited or better for the suited connectors. My offsuit hands that I open from the cutoff, they're Ace 8 offsuit or better, King Jack offsuit or better, and Queen Jack off. So that's knowing your opening range. So step 2 is choose your 3-bet defense frequency. You cannot, and I'll stress this, you cannot fold to 3-bets more than 67% of the time. Now, that doesn't mean you have to 4-bet. You can, of course, call, but do not fold more than 67% of the time. And the reason why is because of the break-even point for a regular bluff 3-bet, and the break-even point is normally 67%. So if your opponent makes a 9 big blind 3-bet, and he does this over your 3 big blind open, he's making automatic profit if you're folding more than 67% of the time. And the math on that is his 9 big blinds, you take that bet size divided by the total pot he's trying to win of 13.5 big blinds. 9 divided by 13.5 is 67%. And I know I sound like a broken record when I talk about break-even math and this kind of stuff, but it's surprisingly how often my students and listeners just don't actually understand all of this. So with 314 combos within your cutoff range, we should be folding a maximum of 67%, which means we're continuing at least 33%, which is 104 combos out of the 314 combos in our opening range. And it's up to you if you'd like to continue with more than 33% of your opening range. Be careful, though, not to continue too often, as that means you're getting to the flop with increasingly weaker hands. As you add more and get beyond that 33% defending, you start adding in just way too weak hands, maybe, or just hands that are tough to play. And it just makes for tougher post-flop decisions. And, of course, potentially more money lost because, you're working in a 3-bet or even a 4-bet pot at this point. But for now, we're continuing 33% of the time with 104 combos. So, what should make up those 104 hands? That's step 3. And step 3 is choose your 3-bet defense hands. So, we know that we're defending with 104 combos. And we could just start with the obvious here. Aces, kings, queens, and ace-queen are better. These make for 50 combos, and great, we should be able to get to the 104 combos pretty quickly at this rate. We're already at 50 combos, practically halfway there. Next, let's add in pocket jacks, and pocket 10s, and pocket 9s. So that's 18 more combos, and that brings us up to 68 combos. And we can't forget to add some more suited aces, either for value or as bluffs with the ace blocker. So ace deuce suited through ace 5 suited, ace 10 suited, and ace jack suited as well are pretty good ones. And all these suited hands are 24 more combos, and that takes us up to 92 combos total that we are defending with. And let's look at broadways next. So we can add king queen suited, king jack suited, queen jack suited, and jack 10 suited for some good suited connectedness and some big card power there, And this adds an additional 16 combos for a new total of 108 combos in our 3-bet defense range. So we wanted 104, we got 108, which is fine. We're defending a little bit more frequently than 33%. And you can see a screenshot of this range in the show notes. Now, you can agree or disagree with my choice of hands. That's totally up to you. I'm not going to fault you if you, let's say you'd rather have ace jack offsuit than ace 5 suited. So be it. That's your choice. And of course, if you want to add hands and defend more often, that's your choice as well. Just like in the next step, step 4, it's up to you how you choose to defend by calling or 4-betting here. There's no set rules when it comes to 3-bet defense strategies. Well, other than the no folding more than 67% of the time, obviously. So, step 4 is whether or not we'll 4-bet or are we going to call? Now, when it comes to 4-betting, Of course, we're doing it with our value hands like queens or better and ace-king, but we need to reserve the right to just call with these hands if we feel it's correct to do so. Hands like pocket queens and ace-king, they're cusp hands, and I heard that term originally from split suit, I believe, and 4-betting with these could be for value or as a bluff. If you feel your opponent will continue with worse hands like pocket jacks or ace-queen, then it's for value. If you're not sure, then just call with these, as that keeps all of their weaker hands within the pot still, and you won't have to fold to a 5-bet. But let's toss in some bluffs as well into our 4-bet range, and we'll do that with the ace-deuce suited and the ace-5 suited, or ace-deuce suited through ace-5 suited. So, altogether, pocket queens or better, ace-king, and ace-deuce through ace-5 suited. That makes for 50 combos of 4-betting hands, 16 of which are semi-bluffs, and that's pretty good. You know, I like that ratio, I think, 16 out of the 50 being the semi-bluff hands. And since we're 4-betting 50 combos, that means we're calling the other 58 combos. And you can see screenshots of all these different ranges, in the show notes. And that's really good and hard to decipher for your opponents, We're 4-betting 50 combos, calling 58 combos. That means it's 46% 4-bets and 54% calls. They won't know what hit them at this rate, And that's the 4-step process for planning your 3-bet defense away from the tables. You should do this with every position that you have an opening range for. I have mine for the early positions, the cutoff, the button, and for the blind. So I have 3-bet defense strategies or, ranges from all of those positions there. And a critical thing to note, though, like I mentioned with the queens and ace-king, those cusp hands, your ranges are never set in stone. You don't have to 4-bet bluff the ace-deuce suited if it seems like the wrong time, and you don't have to call the king-jack suited if that feels wrong as well. We make these plans ahead of time so we can bring our off-the-felt thoughts and analysis and our study. We bring all of that to our on-the-felt play, but we adjust it on the fly based on the situation and the opponent that we're up against. So let's discuss how to adjust our pre-flop 3-bet defense strategies. We've got two options here. We can call or we can 4-bet. Let's talk about calling first. Alrighty, so 3-bet calling adjustments. Let me start by asking you a quick question. When you call the 3-bet, what are you deciding to do? Whether you realize it or not, you're choosing to see the flop, so you've got to make a plan. Now, there's a number of reasons you might be calling. Maybe your opponent has post-flop weaknesses or frequency issues you're planning to take advantage of in the future. Maybe you've got a really strong hand and you don't want him out of the pot yet. Maybe you've got position and you're planning on bluffing him on a later street. Or maybe the price that you're being offered, it's right to call with your speculative hand. Ultimately, when you're calling, you should have at least 2 of the 3 advantages. Card advantage, positional advantage, and skill advantage. If you've got one or none, don't call. And let me repeat that. If you do not have card advantage, positional advantage, or skill advantage, you should not be calling. Even if you only have one of those, you should probably not be calling those 3-bet pots. Save those chips and just consider your open raise. Just consider it a failed steal attempt and move on to the next hand. Don't willingly get into a losing battle in a 3-bet pot. Alrighty, when going post-flop, you'll use info that you've gained from previous encounters, tendencies, stats, notes, all that kind of stuff. You'll use that, as well as their 3-bet range, the board texture, your hand, and their bet sizing. You want to ask yourself questions like, how would they play with their value hands? How do they play their bluff hands? What size are their bluffs? And what size are their value bets? Okay, so you decided to call. Hopefully, you're doing so in position to give you that all-important post-flop positional advantage. Once that flop hits, you have some choices here. So when you're calling in position, you can float the flop, which means, they check, you bet, and you're betting for bluff or for value. You can raise their C-bet, so they bet and you raise, again, for bluff or for value. And you can call the C-bet. They bet and you call to continue to the turn. Then you play the turn with the same options as just discussed right here. And sometimes, though, you'll be calling out a position. Like when you open the cutoff and the button 3-bets. In this case, you really should have a tighter calling range, just due to the positional disadvantage that you're willingly getting yourself into. But when out of position, here are your options. So you can, of course, fold. You check, they bet, you fold because you've got nothing and you can't bluff them in the future. Or bluff them here or on a future street. You can check raise. So, you check, they bet or they make their C bet and you decide to raise for value or as a bluff. You can donk lead. You're first to act, and you bet instead of checking to the 3-better, either for value or for a bluff. Again, that's up to you. And of course, there's the stop and go play, and that's donk shoving on any flop. And this is common when maybe you're playing short stacked cash, or you're in a sit and go or an MTT. It's not so common when you have a super deep stack, but that's not to say it's not effective. You just run the risk of, hey, he was 3-betting you with a value hand like pocket aces or kings, and he's calling you no matter what right there. But that's the stop and go play. And regardless of position, if you're going for value post-flop, you have a strong hand and you want them to continue in the hand. You've got to remember that. But if you're post-flop bluffing, you need to have fold equity. Your opponent has to have a fold button. Plus, the stacks need to be deep enough that he's fearful of losing more and doesn't feel quote-unquote pot committed. If the stack-to-pot ratio is low, like 2 times the pot in the stacks behind, $80 stacks and a $40 pot, for example, very common to see that, then they're much less likely to fold, and they'll fight for that 3-bet pot. When you decide to call that 3-bet, like I said before, you're choosing to go post-flop. So you should be looking at your opponent's C-bet stats and their C-bet stats in 3-bet pots. Poker Tracker 4, they calculate these separately, and it can be pretty telling when you spot a difference between these numbers. So, for example, if somebody C-bets 85% of the time normally, but in 3-bet pots, they C-bet only 40% of the time, which is less than half, they are so much more flop honest in 3-bet pots. So, if they C-bet, you can easily fold, knowing that they've got a hand that they think is valuable enough to make the C-bet. If they check, whether you are in position or out of position, you can determine the best play at that time. But it will usually involve taking a stab at the pot, either in position on the flop or out of position on the turn. If they C-bet a lot, you can check raise bluff as well, or call for value to get another bluff out of them. If you support me on Patreon, you can get some exclusive poker strategy content that I won't deliver anywhere else. There are different levels of support, and with each level comes different exciting rewards. At $5, you get Patreon exclusive podcasts. At $15, you get the podcast and a training video. And at the incredible $50 level, you get the podcast, video, and a full 1.5-hour webinar. That's over 2 hours of killer content for $50 a month. For my October supporters, I just delivered a training video of a player targeting session that I played where I successfully doubled up through the opponent that I was targeting. I also delivered a podcast simply called Revenge, where I discussed what to do when a player at the table is putting you on tilt. So, if you support me for November in Patreon, I'll send you those 2 items as a bonus. Those were the October, rewards that I gave my Patreon supporters. So, to learn more or to support me, please visit patreon.com/smartpokerstudy. Alrighty, back to class, poker people. So it's time to get aggressive, baby, with some 4-bet talk. Let's hit value 4-bets first. And we'll go with an obvious example. We've got pocket aces, we open the pot, and we get 3-bet. Of course, we're never folding pocket aces. So what do we do, though? We can call or we can raise. Before we decide, you've got to think about the range that he'll give your 4-bet action with. If he's only continuing with pocket kings or better, and you have pocket aces, then you might want to just call to keep all of his strong and weak 3-betting hands in the pot still. One interesting thing to note is that pocket aces versus a range of kings or better, it's a 77% favorite. But if you call and keep his range wide, maybe he has got a 7% 3-bet that he normally does, but you've got the pocket aces, you are an 85% favorite over that 7% range. So that's not a bad play, making the call, because you're going to be going post-flop, and you stand to earn some really good post-flop value with that killer pocket aces. If he's continuing with a large portion of his 3-bet range, way more than just the pocket kings, let's say that he is calling or 5-betting with pocket jacks or better and ace king, then making the 4-bet is a better play because he's continuing very often and you're building the pot while you can, and he's still likely to continue. A good sizing to use for 4-bets is 2.5 times the 3-bet. If he makes a standard 9 big blind 3-bet times 2.5 means you're making about 22.5, so 22 or 23 big blinds. And this is a good sizing for both value 4-bets and bluff 4-bets. When bluffing, It really minimizes your risk while putting lots of pressure on the opponent, and it gives you good value when you've got that value hand. Plus, you want to keep the sizing the same. You don't want to choreograph your bluffs with smaller sizings, and you don't want to choreograph your value 4-bets with larger sizings. So stick with the bet size near 2.5x and go with it every single time. If they 5-bet, you could just get it in with your superior value hand. And if they call, the pot will be about 45 big blinds. If you started with 100 big blind stacks, this makes for a stack to pot ratio of less than 2-1. And that ends up being super easy to get it in post-flop if you feel your value hand, if it's still ahead of their 4-bet calling range once the flop hits. So here's a great question for you. How do you know that you've got a value hand? Basically, if they can call or 5-bet with worse, then it's a value hand. If they only continue with better and fold all worse hands, then you're bluffing. These are the same considerations when we're value 3-betting. Can he continue with worse? If yes, it's for value. Go ahead and do it. So it's time to discuss some bluff 4-betting. All of the considerations that we'll discuss here, they're the same when making a bluff 3-bet, like we discussed last episode, number 107. So the first consideration is your opponent. Let's say you think you're facing a bluff 3-bet. To help you determine this, it helps to look at their stats from any position. A 3-bet of over 5 to 6%, it means they're 3-betting more than just value hands. You really want to see 7% or more, but 5% is where value range really ends. And if you look at a 7% range in Flopzilla, it's something like pocket 10s or better, ace jack or better, and king queen. It's tough for them to defend against your 4-bet with pocket 10s and jacks, as well as the king queen and the ace jack and the ace queen offsuit. These hands make up about 60% of the 7% range. So they're folding 60% of the time to your 4-bet rebluff. That's great, and it's even better if they're 3-betting more than 7%. The higher the percentage, the more likely your 4-bet bluff will work. And of course, 4-bet bluffs in position, they're more likely to work than out of position 4-bet bluffs. You might not get 5-bet any more frequently in position versus out of position, but you'll definitely get called more often when out of position. A lot of aggressive opponents are looking to play against you with position, and they'll try to use their position post-flop to blow you off of your 4-bet hand. And in case your 4-bet bluff gets called, you'd love to see some post-flop weaknesses, like folding too much to C-bets or making small steal attempts that you can easily raise over. Okay, the next consideration is your cards. Just like I talked about in last episode about 3-bet bluffs, your cards really matter, and blockers can come in handy. Blockers to premium hands like aces and kings, they're great to have when you're 4-bet bluffing. A hand like pocket 7s or jack 10 suited, it's not so good as they've got very few 7s or jacks or 10s in their range, and that's not going to block hardly anything. Having an ace or a king makes it so they have less pocket aces, pocket kings, and less ace kings and ace queens in their range that they can defend with. Now, this is looking at outright profitability, and that means we're only thinking that we'll win if they fold. But even if we do get called and we're forced to go post-flop, it's possible to take the pot down with a C-bet or a double barrel, or we could hit 2-pair, a straight, maybe even a flush with our ace-5 suited, and we can win that bloated 3-bet pot. You can't think that it's the end of the world when your 4-bet bluff gets called. The last consideration to think about before you make that bluff 4-bet is your perceived range and your image. So do they think you're capable of 4-bet bluffing? Do they play back against you a lot just in general? Are they an unbeliever and they call down quite frequently with under pairs and second pair hands? Maybe they've called your 3-bets pretty wide in the past. If they think you're capable of blowing smoke up their butts, then they're less likely to fold to your 4-bet. So you want to 4-bet bluff with position, with blockers, and against players who will likely believe you. And if they have post-flop weaknesses, that's a bonus as well. Alrighty, it's time to talk about 4-bet study and 4-bet practice. First, you're going to play some focus sessions this week. You need to take your newly created 3-bet defense ranges and practice with them on 1 or 2 tables at a time. Drop down in stakes if it's necessary, if you're feeling a little uncomfortable with adding this kind of aggression to your game. As you play, tag each hand in Poker Tracker 4 with a, quote, 4-bet opportunity tag, and you want to do that to make it easy to review the hands the next day. So when you're doing your hand history reviews, you can either filter for the hands you tagged or filter for re-raise opportunity 4-bet, facing a 3-bet, and you'll find that under pre-flop actions and opportunities. This will show you every instance where you had the opportunity to 4-bet, not just when you were the original opener. And this is good because the more time spent studying your opponent's 3-bets, the better you'll get at finding opportunities to 4-bet for value or 4-bet bluff. calling 3-bets and 4-betting, it can be difficult for people to get accustomed to, without aces, kings, queens, or ace-king. But this is your opportunity to add a new skill to your arsenal of poker plays. Challenge! Here's my challenge to you for this episode. Practice 4-betting. I just told you how. Now it's up to you to do the work to add this play to your game. At the very least, you'll gain some understanding of what your opponents are possibly doing when they are 4-betting. But if you take the time to do this right, to plan your 3-bet defense away from the tables, then utilize your plan on the tables, you're going to turn yourself into a much more aggressive and skilled opponent. Now it's your turn to take action and do something positive for your poker game.
Now get it on.
Alrighty, to recap the episode, I discussed making a plan off the tables for how you will defend against the oh-so-common 3-bet. You learn to start with your open raising range, then decide how frequently you'll defend against the 3-bet, then pick the hands that you will defend with. You've got to incorporate some bluffs within that range, and you also need to decide how you'll defend, either with a call or with a 4-bet. And then I discussed some things to consider when making the 3-bet call, and the things you need to consider when making the 4-bet. Most of the considerations for 4-betting, they're the same for 3-betting, You want to think about your opponent, your cards, and your perceived range, of course. And I ended the discussion with how you should go about practicing the skill of defending versus those 3-bets. If you're not already there, head on over to the show notes at www.smartpokerstudy.com/pod108 for screenshots and links to everything I discussed today. Thank you so much for listening today. I want your feedback, so hit me with it through the show notes or via email or Twitter or the Facebook group. And please send me your questions, your leaks, or ideas for podcast topics through all those channels just mentioned. Ooh, shout out time. So many of you listeners are working on your online games and you're adopting Poker Tracker 4 as your poker software of choice. And I love that you're purchasing it through me. Just this past week, Josh Dubba, he purchased and downloaded Poker Tracker 4 and he received my Smart HUD in recognition of his awesome attitude towards online poker improvement. Thank you, Josh. If you want to follow in the footsteps of Josh this week, Mrs. Anonymous last week, and so many others in the past, you can purchase Poker Tracker 4 through my affiliate link at www.smartpokerstudy.com/PokerTracker4. That's all one word with the number 4 at the end. Thanks for that support, and congrats on your decision to improve your game. Alrighty, poker people, be sure to come back next week for the first class in minimum effective dose number 4, blind play. We're going to talk small blind, big blind, re-steaming, ranges, folding, bluffing, everything. Let's get you on a course to improving your win rate in the blinds. Word of mouth is the best advertising, so thank you very much for sharing this show with other poker people. Your sharing and caring is what helps us grow. Until next time, study smart, play much, and make your next session the best one yet.